I was literally gushing blood like a tap. I had to go through the whole process of labor. It was easy, an easy labor again, but I lost that child, which was, any mother who's lost a child, especially, you've gone 5.5 months, that can be a bit traumatic. From the very early stages, I started having contractions. When I was like 4 months, I started having contractions. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Then I also had a situation whereby if I lay on my back, I would faint. So I had to stop, and I actually went out somewhere, and I think I must have leaned back or whatever, and I had a fainting experience. Eventually, because of all that was going on, I went to see the doctor, and because of the contractions I was having, I was put on bed rest. I had to take Ventolin tablets throughout my pregnancies. In fact, for my first and my third, I had to take Ventolin throughout my pregnancies. I also had to have a Shirodka stitch. I hope I said the name right, I'm not sure, but I think it was called a Shirodka stitch, where they stitch your cervix to make sure that you don't give birth prematurely, especially since I kept on having contractions. So because of the Ventolin, because of the contractions, I was on bed rest. I couldn't sleep on my back. It was quite a trying period for me because I'm an active person. I don't like to stay in one place. And my experience with bed rest is that it makes you very weak because you don't get the chance to really exercise and use your muscles. So you become weaker as the time progresses. But I'll sort of touch on all three of my birthing experiences. The first one, towards the end of my term, because it was late, because it was the late stages of the pregnancy, I went to have the stitch out probably like I think a month and a half before my due date. So because of that, I could go around. I could now get up and walk about a bit. I was having, like I said, I was having contractions, but they were not painful. Then one particular morning, I woke up, my feet were swollen, my fingers were swollen. And my hospital was very close to my house at the time, so I just walked down, knowing that even if I went into labor, it'd be okay. By the time I got to the hospital, the doctor looked at me, checked my blood pressure, said everything was okay. But as I was stepping out of the door, he now said, let me just check you. And by the time he checked me, he said, you're halfway dilated. You're contracting. Don't you have any pain? I said, no, I don't have any pain. So to cut the long story short, that first pregnancy, I delivered in just under 2 hours. I had no pain. I didn't even know I was in labor, until, I had to really push. So although I had a very difficult pregnancy period, the labor was very, very easy. So that sort of gave me the misconception that all my other pregnancies, at least the deliveries, would be easy, but Anyway, the second one, by that time I had moved to another doctor because my first doctor, unfortunately, he had passed away during that period of time. And even though I'd shared my history, the doctors didn't recommend that I have a stitch. I was still having contractions, so I was put on Ventolin again. But and then I was also put on bed rest, but it wasn't such a strict bed rest. And I thought, okay, maybe this is going to be an easier pregnancy. But at 5.5 months, one particular day, I just suddenly had this excruciating pain, and it came from my cervix area. I lay down. After a while, it subsided. I didn't think anything of it. And at that period of time, it was a bit of a difficult time in terms of some things that were happening in my life at that time. And I was staying with my mother. My husband was on a job at that time. And my mother lived in Iju, which is quite, for those of you who know Lagos, and at that time it was quite, it was far out, considered to be far out on the outskirts. We didn't have mobile phones in those times. And then all of a sudden in the evening, I just started bleeding. I couldn't drive, my mother couldn't drive, we didn't have anybody around to drive. So it wasn't until the following day that I went to the hospital to see the doctor. And the long and short of the story was that they had to induce labor. They said that I was already in labor, that it had gone too far and that the baby wouldn't be able to make it. I had to go through the whole process of labor. It was easy, an easy labor again, but I lost that child, which was, any mother who's lost a child, especially, you've gone 5.5 months, that can be a bit traumatic, but, we thank God in everything. Because my other two labors had been easy, I expected my third labor to be easy. Needless to say, I was a bit disenfranchised with the whole, pregnancy issue. So I didn't plan to get pregnant so soon after, but not so long in your marriage, very often you're not so good with birth control. So next thing I knew, in a few months' time, I was pregnant again. This time, because of my history, they were watching me. But at just around towards the end of the 3rd month of that pregnancy, I developed gastroenteritis, which is an infection, I think, of your intestines. And I started, vomiting and throwing up. Now, for my other pregnancies, I never had any morning sickness. Thank God, I never had any morning sickness. So because I had no morning sickness, I thought, okay, maybe this is morning sickness. I'm throwing up, and I'm throwing up continuously. But it just kept on going on. And luckily for me, at that point in time, a friend came over, and she was a doctor. And she looked at me, she said, no, this is not morning sickness. There's something wrong. We need to take you to the hospital. So they took me to the hospital. And when I got there, they had to put me on drip. They said that I had gastroenteritis. It was, they did some tests and all that. So I was admitted. And that was when I discovered that when you're dehydrated, if you go like this and you squeeze your skin actually stays up. It doesn't just, it doesn't, flatten out straight away. Because that's one of the tests they did. So I was admitted. I don't know whether I went into the hospital too early, and because I normally have contractions, perhaps they mistook it as my final contractions. But I went in on an afternoon. I can't remember what day of the week it was. I think it was a Saturday, I'm not sure. But I went in on the afternoon of the first day. In the evening, they started to induce me, and that was very painful, and I was not dilating, even though I was contracting. So halfway through the night, they stopped inducing me. The contractions came down a little bit, the frequency came back, but I was already very exhausted. Then early in the morning, they said, look, we have to continue. I'm a person of faith. Being a Christian, of course, I was praying, and all of a sudden, I just got this impression in my heart telling me that don't worry, you're not going to lose your baby, you're not going to die. And, it came very strong. You're not going to lose your baby, you're not going to die. So I was wondering that, what's this about? But, I went to bed, and early in the morning, I woke up and I just felt, I felt all my thighs were wet. I got up and I was just, covered in blood, and I was literally gushing blood like a tap. We called the nurses. The nurses, rushed in. One of the nurses actually was panicking, and doctor had to come in and send her out of the room. And I could hear him reprimanding her outside that you don't behave like that in front of a patient. So although everything around me spoke of the fact that I should be afraid, because I'd had that impression that that I was not going to die. I got that word that you are not going to die. You're not going to lose your baby. And as I was praying, a scripture came to mind that you shall not cast your young, and I've sent an angel to watch over you. So I was convinced that, God was with me even in this. They had to roll me into the theater to actually evacuate my womb, They put me under the anesthetic. I was out. And by the time I came back, they woke me up and they said they just don't understand it. That as soon as they put me under the anesthetic, the bleeding just stopped. And when I say bleeding, it was like, when somebody is losing blood to the point where you're worried that, this person is going to go. They said as soon as I went under the anesthetic, that just stopped. So the next thing I was told was that, okay, because of the situation I was in, I should not move. I had to lie down. Said whatever position I lie down, I need to stay in that position. So I need to find a very comfortable position to lie down. And because of my history, I couldn't lie down on my back. So I had to lie down on my side. Regarding, lying back and fainting, I can't remember the name of the term, but I remember reading up that for some women, when they lie back, it's like the womb presses on, I think, a particular blood vessel. I think it's a blood vessel, not a nerve, but a particular blood vessel which kind of cuts the supply of blood to somewhere, which makes you begin to feel faint, you know. So I kept on having, you know, near misses. After the first one where I fainted outright, I kept on having near misses until a doctor told me I need sleep on my side. Then I started doing my own research. Needless to say, during my pregnancies, I read a lot. I read a lot. My husband will tell you. I'll be telling him, you know when you're pregnant this, you know when you're pregnant this, he got tired of that. You know when you're pregnant this happens to you. When you're pregnant, you know, I kept saying that, and I felt very ill. I was still on the antibiotics from the infection. I felt very weak and, you know, somewhat traumatized, exhausted, you know, from the loss of blood. I didn't want a blood transfusion, you know, and they said, okay, I didn't need to have one. But as I lay on my bed, you know, they told me, don't move. The next thing I knew, and this is where, you know, when I tell people the story, I said, this is a, you know, very spiritual aspect of the story. The next thing I knew, I felt something come in and just start shaking me. I mean, I wasn't sleeping, I was awake. Something just came in and started shaking my body, really vigorously shaking me, you know, and I just began to call out to God and just, you know, pray, you know, that God, you know, I need you here. I started pleading the blood of Jesus. And after a while, whatever it was stopped shaking me, and I turned around, I looked, I didn't see anything except like reflections, almost like splinters of glass in the air. So, I mean, you know, I don't know how to explain that, but that was the experience I had. And, you know, it kept coming to my mind. The doctors had told me that I must be very still. So I was really worried that, okay, something had come and was shaking me, and would I lose this child? They had to put me on a bed. My feet were up, my head was down, so I had to sleep that way. It was very, very uncomfortable. And I don't know what it is with hospitals. It's like they just keep giving you carbohydrates, you know, hardly any fruits, hardly any vegetables. I don't know if it's changed now, but, you know, so the next thing I knew, I was also constipated. And I had to sleep with my feet up, my head down. I couldn't get up. They had to wash me, bathe me on the bed. I had to use, you know, these pans to go to the toilet. It was very, very, very uncomfortable. I did not like the experience at all. And I don't think I had my second son until around 1 o'clock. So it was a really long, drawn out labor. It was very tiring. It was difficult. I think the baby was a little bit distressed, but, you know, thank God, you know, he was okay at the end of the day. And I was in hospital for quite a while. I can't remember how long, but I think it was more than a month. I was in hospital for quite a while. I sort of kind of blocked that part of that pregnancy out of my mind, but I was there for a while. And from there, eventually I went home, strict instructions to be on bed rest. It was very tough, especially when you have, we already have a small child who was 3 at the time. I had my first son who was 3 at the time. I was still very, very uncomfortable. I was still having the contractions, and that continued throughout the pregnancy. At that point in time, it put me off the idea of having any more children, because it was just such a traumatic experience, and it was so long drawn out, and I didn't really want to have to go through that again. I think from every pregnancy, I learned quite a bit. I learned a lot about being pregnant. I learned a lot about my own body, how my body works. I did learn that there's some things peculiar to me. In my case, I always had contractions, and I had contractions from a very early stage in my pregnancies. I learned how to be careful how to sleep and how not to sleep. But when it came to labor, I would say that the labors were different. The first one was the easiest because I wasn't even aware it was going on. The second one wasn't too hard, partly because the baby was so small. The contractions, because they had to induce and speed up the whole process, was a little bit painful, but it was still bearable. The last one, I mean, took me by complete surprise because I never expected to be in the labor ward for so long. I think, though, from speaking to friends, I think you can go in having learned something from your previous, pregnancy, but you have to keep in mind that every pregnancy is slightly different, and then for all you know, some pregnancies may be completely different. I know of someone who her pregnancies are easy, her deliveries are so fast. I mean, she has what they call, I've forgotten the word, but she has really, really fast deliveries in less, like I had for my first one, less than 2 hours, sometimes even less than an hour. So I think you do learn, but you also have to keep an open mind that every pregnancy can be different and probably will be different in some way. But at the end of the day, you look at your children and you're happy. You sort of forget, until you talk about it.